Hello everybody, we just finished watching the 4th episode of the Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku anime adaptation, and as per usual, I want to talk about it because Hell's Paradise is pretty good if you ask me. So, let's get started. So, like I said, this is the 4th episode of Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku. This is a really sort of interesting episode, because if you remember last episode, we covered like the last half of Chapter 6, and this episode, we actually start off covering the first half of Chapter 6, alright? But before we get into that, I actually want to say this episode is called Hell and Paradise, right? So, that's really sort of an interesting thing there. Because, I mean, it's almost like, oh man, the series title, Hell's Paradise, right? But besides for that, this episode covers, like I said, that initial first part of Chapter 6, and then Chapter 7 through 9. So if we want to look at it, it's like 3.5 chapters, right? Which isn't bad at all. I mean, that's what Chainsaw Man, whenever it was running, that's what Mappa was doing for that adaptation. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty good if you ask me. So, to start off the episode proper, like I said, we start off Chapter 6 with learning more about Fuchi and Ginyu Tetsusai. So, if you remember last time, Ginyu Tetsusai was the guy who cut off his own arm, so the bugs didn't sprout his arm and turn him into a tree or whatever, and we pretty much learn his backstory, right? He's a dude who knows how to fight and likes to fight. Well, eventually some lord came to him and asked him to be his officer, and they were down sitting and drinking tea, right? And Ginyu Tetsusai has characters that mean dragon in his name, so we sort of know that he is the sword dragon or the blade dragon in Jigokuraku, right? That's sort of his name, like Gabimaru to Haru, Ginyu Tetsusai, the sword dragon. So this dude has dragon in his name too, and pretty much as they're sitting down, this Shogun officer guy is just like, hey, I bet you can't even cut down a real dragon, right? Well, this really pisses Ginyu Tetsusai off, and he goes outside and cuts down this guy's sort of front entrance to his house that has a dragon on it, right? And pretty much because he did that and pissed off this guy so much, this Shogun or whatever, sent all of his family members after him, right? All of his apostates and everything, to pretty much just run after him and capture him, and that's how he ended up on the death row and being part of the criminals. At this point, we get formally introduced to Fuchi, or Yamada Simon Fuchi, the person of the Yamada clan who is with Ginyu Tetsusai, right? And we sort of learn here that Fuchi is into, like, dissecting of the human body, and he finds it fun. And there's an interesting dynamic between Ginyu Tetsusai and Fuchi here, where Ginyu Tetsusai wants to just cut people down, right? He wants to hone his skills and do all of that, right? And Fuchi is just the opposite of this, right? He even notes here that the Yamada Simon aren't just people who cut people's heads off, right? They are sword testers, and they also produce medicine. As we see a really sort of interesting image of Fuchi as, like, child, just going through here and dissecting humans. It's like, well, here's the thing, discoveries about the human body can help advance medicine, and that's sort of what I want to do. And at this point, we see that Fuchi grabs out his sword and sort of points it at Ginyu Tetsusai, and we see that it has a sort of weird curved design, right? And on the end of it, it almost has a hook around it where the blade sort of moves around to the back. It's a very sort of interesting blade. So we're going through here, and eventually Fuchi and Ginyu Tetsusai are walking through the woods, and Ginyu Tetsusai is just like, man, that guy probably could have killed me if he wanted to, right? But as they keep on walking, they eventually reach the Buddhist temple area that we saw last time, and before they really take in note of what's going around, Fuchi's like, so what are you planning to do here? And Ginyu Tetsusai's like, I'm going to eliminate competition, right? Because if no more competition's here, I don't really have to worry about anything going on. And Fuji's like, oh, that could be interesting. But he's like, here's the thing, over time, they're bound to send more people, so this probably won't end well for either of us. But as they finally realize what's going on around them at this sort of Buddhist campsite or whatever, they sort of see here, and we get sort of what we saw last episode of the giant sort of the giant guy with, like, the spear sticking out of his neck and the hands coming out of his eyes, and all the critters crawling around. And at this point, we cut back over to Sagiri and Gabimaru, who are facing off against a praying fish-looking thing. And that is where we get the opening, which is, of course, work by Millennium Parade and Ringo Shiina. So it's interesting to note about all of that's before the opening. That is the rest of Chapter 6. I mean, from beginning to end, that is completely what that is the rest of Chapter 6, which I sort of like how they're, and with something else, like whenever the break comes up in this episode, they're really segmenting the chapters like they are actually done in the manga, which I actually think is pretty cool. But once we get to the other side of the opening, we're of course dealing with Sagiri and Gabimaru against a weird-looking fish thingy. So, pretty much we see that Gabimaru's like, huh, that's weird, the fish is wearing prayer beads. And he's like, is that a monster or a living creature here? And eventually a fish isn't just taking any of this, right? And it pulls apart the prayer beads as it opens up its hands, and Gabimaru's like, I don't like this whatsoever, this isn't good. So he gets in a fighting stance, and he ends up telling Sagiri to stay back, right? Don't confront it, I'll just do all that on my own, right? And we see that while Gabimaru's here, he sort of gets a message in his head, or he remembers back on one of the on the 5th shinobi rule that the chief of Igakaware village always told him, and that was to not fight an unknown enemy, right? And Gabimaru is just like, okay, if I don't fight it, I need to escape. But do I escape with Sagiri, or do I just take myself? As we see Sagiri sort of having a little bit of trouble fighting off these beasts. And while Gabimaru's thinking about this, the fish thing sort of has two, like, serrated blade tails, and they go and wrap around Gabimaru and throw him on the ground. And he actually bleeds, he gets pretty hurt from this, and Sagiri's just like, man, even the great Gabimaru gets hurt, and Gabimaru's like, as I told you to stay back. But he's like, alright, Sagiri, we need to run and get out of here. As they start to look around, and while there aren't any creatures that look like this praying fish thing, there's a bunch more that look even bigger than it, just walking around and surrounding them. And there's a bunch of, like, really weird looking ones. I don't really know how to explain most of them, but they've got, like, really goofy faces, and they're all sort of smiling, and they just look really, really weird, right? And Sagiri's just like, oh no, this is bad, we're surrounded. And then Gabimaru, like, kneels down to a stance, pulls his mask back up over his face, and he's just like, this is enough of this, I need to stop thinking and just fight. As he runs up to one of these, and we get some really cool animation as he uses his Ninpo aesthetic blaze to just burn the throat out of one of them, right? He goes through, cuts off another one's head, and he just kills many and many of these, and we sort of get a little bit of insight on Sagiri as she's watching this. She's just like, man, I knew this was a dangerous job, but it's so different now. And she's like, everything has changed in a mere hour, as we just, like, see in her eye, or the reflection of Gabimaru just spilling blood out of all of these creatures, right? And eventually Sagiri just says the famous line of, am I in paradise, or am I in dun dun dun? So we see that Gabimaru is just working on killing some more here, and eventually we see that Sagiri is gotten surrounded by one of these things, and she's obviously not in the right headspace, so she will probably get killed by this thing. And Gabimaru's like, oh no, I can't save her, I've got to fight the people in front of me, right? I don't need to worry about her. But we see as she's about to get hurt, he's thinking back to everything that happened last episode, and like, being courageous isn't weakness, right? And he's just like, courage is blind your emotions, and he just goes through and he's like, I need to eliminate what's in front of me. As we see he goes back and he cuts off the one thing who's about to hurt Sagiri's arm, and ends up saving Sagiri, right? And she's just like, I'm fine, so sorry for doing this. As the tentacle things, the serrated tail, whatever you want to call them, things from the fish prayer creature, comes and they start to go towards Gabimaru, and all of a sudden another sword slices the thing down and ends the rest of them. And the fight is over. But here we see one of the other prisoners that we have seen before in episode 2. It was Yuzuriha, the female kunoichi. And we see two Yamada Saimon with her. And Gabimaru makes a note of, why does she have two Yamada Saimon? I mean, that doesn't really seem right. But Yuzuriha is just like, oh, so you killed all of these creatures by yourself? Man, you really are Gabimaru to Hollow. She's like, man, this is really something else, right? And Gabimaru's is about to say, like, what do you guys think you're doing? And he sort of has a cool little flashback to his wife, where his wife is, right, like, you're supposed to say thank you whenever somebody helps you out, right? So Gabimaru kneels down and is just like, oh, thank you for what you did. I mean, you didn't have to help me, but thank you for what you ended up doing there, right? And we sort of continued on as Yuzuriha sort of walked up to him and was like, you don't need to be so on edge, right? Calm down. And she walks up to him, she's like, you're so dependable. And she calls him Gabi-kun, right? And she's like, you're still standing despite being so bloodied and beaten up, right? And she's also like, oh, did you just save her back there too? And pretty much Yuzuriha sort of starts to push herself onto Gabimaru, right? And she's like, I'm scared of this dangerous place, right? She's like, I'll do whatever you say, just help me out here. And Gabimaru sort of isn't taking this, right? And he sort of just pins her to the ground. This is sort of a running joke here. So he pins her to the ground, and he's like, you can't seduce me, right? I know your female kunoichi techniques, right? And Vijay lets go of Yuzuriha, and she goes back onto the rock. She's like, yeah, I'm sure you are, but I wanted to try it out, right? Isn't it better to regret what you've done than to regret what you haven't even tried, right? But then she sort of continues on, like, hey, I'm serious about working together, right? You and Sagiri here, and then me and my two other guys, that would make 5 people. That is a lot better than just the odds of 2 people. As we see here that we have 2 Yamada Simon, and one of them gets introduced. His name is Yamada Simon Genji, right? So we pretty much learn what his deal is and what he's with Yuzuriha, because he is not the original tester with her. Pretty much he was focusing on a guy named Moro Makia the Apostate, and pretty much when Yuzuriha fooled him and ended up killing him, and by seducing him pretty much, and what ended up happening is Genji was pretty much seduced by her instead, so he's following her under the guise of she seemed too strong and she wouldn't be able to survive without 2 people. So yeah, it's just a little bit of a joke thing, is they make the note of, oh, his weakness has always been women. So haha, funny look at that, right? So the other guy is Yamada Simon Sinta, and as he's talking, Yuzuriha pretty much just cuts him off on accident, and it's a little bit of a joke here that Yuzuriha just cuts him off without letting him say much, right? So, and we see that he is rank 5, Sinta is, and, ooh, I forgot what Genji was. Oh, let me go research this real fast. Actually, it doesn't say what Genji's rank is, which is sort of interesting. So, Sinta is number 5, so that's fun to know. So then we eventually learn here what Yuzuriha is actually wanting. So, pretty much, she knows that Gabimaru is strong, and her group has information, so they sort of want to work together for the whole idea of information and strength in numbers. And that is sort of the whole little thing that is going on here between the 2 groups. We also learn here that Sinta was the one originally assigned to Yuzuriha, and they're working together, and Gabimaru's like, hey, Sagiri, what do you think of this? And Sagiri's just like, to be honest with you, I don't think there's a problem with you guys working together as a group if you're fine with that. And Gabimaru's like, okay, but here's the thing. I don't really know about this as Yuzuriha comes and sort of forces herself on Gabimaru again. And so Gabimaru just pins her down again, and it's a little bit of a joke. But then Yuzuriha sort of pulls him down closer, and it's just like, hey, here's the thing. Trust, we can betray each other at any time, so it's not really a problem, right? And she also brings up the point that even if they found the elixir as a group, only one of them could end up being pardoned, right? So they can't always work together. Something's going to come between them if they want to survive and get off the island. So pretty much Yuzuriha's just like, so will you help me, right? And she eventually says that, yeah, you'll offer your strength in exchange for my information. And she says, here's the thing, you think the monsters are a big problem on this thing? No, it's the bugs, as we sort of get the idea of the human face bugs again, and what ended up happening to Geni Tetsusai last time by his arm literally turning to wood. And Garumaru is just like, well, okay, well, how do you know this information, right? That seems like something pretty important, and nobody around you has probably died. And we see that what ended up happening was Yuzuriha talked Morio into actually going and doing this, right? So she inadvertently killed him and tied him up to a tree, and he got eaten by the bugs and turned into that, right? So Sinta now speaks up, and he's just like, here's the thing. Many of the items on this island, on the monsters at least, feature a lot of Buddhist and Taoist designs, which is interesting little fact about, the Buddhist and Taoist ideologies here, and knowing what comes up later in the series. So she pretty much says that Buddhism and Taoism are different religious traditions, and it's really strange to see them sort of mixed together on this island, as he also points out that the Buddhist statues here on this island are really strange too, as we see one which is sort of a regular Buddhist statue, except both of the arms have heads on the middle of them, and one of them just has like another arm with a head coming out of its stomach. So it's just a really weird and creepy design. And he continues to say that I have trouble believing if this island is truly paradise. Look at that again. And now Sagiri goes over, pulls out her blade, and cuts open one of the arms of one of these creatures that was just murdered by Sinta, Genji, and Gabimaru. And she's like, here's the thing. By cutting one of these guys open, I can tell that it is the same muscle structure of a living creature, right? It's not like a bug or a plant or anything like that. And Yuzuriha is just like, yeah, see, there's so much we don't know. But she's like, I'll tell you everything I know, so are we working together? And eventually, Garumaru's like, so are you just desperate to survive and live? And Yuzuriha sort of just starts to make up a bogus story. She's like, I have a sister, she has an incurable disease, but I can't afford any medicine, so I became a shinobi in order to make some money for her, right? And she starts to like, so I endured the hellish training of this ninja tribe, and ends up saying something wrong, so Garumaru sort of calls her bluff out on it, and it's just like, hey, if you're gonna lie, at least keep it short. And Yuzuriha's just like, oh, well, I'm sorry, I don't really have a personal reason for wanting to live. And she's like, I've got nothing like that, so I just want to make it back home alive, and that is my reason for doing all of this, right? And she's just like, oh, well, maybe all these samurai over here wouldn't understand. They're just working for the shogun here. And Garumaru eventually is just like, hey, here's the thing. I have another question. And he's like, what did you actually do to Moro Makia? As we sort of see that Yuzuriha is just here, and she gets a really evil look on her face, and she's like, I did nothing, right? As we see that he's sort of here and just completely sprouted over in plants in this sort of back, and she's like, do you actually care about others? Because it'll get you killed here on this island. As we get probably a really interesting sort of image of Yuzuriha here being, look, it's sort of creepy. But eventually she just says, like, so what's the deal? And Garumaru eventually says, here's the thing, I want information so we can work together, right? And Yuzuriha comes up and hugs him and is like, oh man, you're the best, Gabi-chan, as Garumaru pins her back down to the ground again. As Sinta's just like, alright then, let's share what we know as a group. And they sort of start to talk to each other. Yuzuriha sort of makes a little joke here. And we see that Sagiri's back here, and we sort of get this image of the place from her point of view. Like, everything is sort of fogged up, and she is standing here, and the audio that we hear is a little distorted, and she's just like, what have I really done on this island? I feel like I've been useless as can be. And she's just standing here, and all of a sudden, next thing we know, she fainted and she's on the ground, right? And everybody looks over and it's like, oh no, Sagiri's on the ground, what happened to her? And that is where we get the break in the episode. Fun fact, another unique title screen to this episode, and another fun fact, this is actually the point in the manga in which Chapter 8 ends. So that means from the opening to the break here, we cover 2 full chapters that sort of run into each other. And I think that's pretty cool. So now on to the next part of the episode. So whenever we start off after the break, we open up with the words, change is strength. And this is being said by one of the Yamada Asaemon as he is almost being newly inducted into the Yamada Asaemon clan. So here in a minute, we'll pretty much learn what this dude's name is, but just for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to say it now. His name is Toma. So Toma's here, and he is becoming a member of the clan within a month of actually joining it, right? And we actually see Eisen here, or Eisen, whatever you want to call him, and he's just like, oh, interesting. The only thing you need to do now is execute someone, and you'll be a full-fledged part of the clan. And he's like, so, anybody you wanna kill? And Toma's just like, here's the thing, I have a request. And he walks down to the basement of wherever the prisoners are locked up, and he walks up to a criminal, one that we know, who is Azachobe, and it's like, hey, thank you for waiting. He's like, I've come to save you, brother. As we pretty much learned the dynamic between these two, right? So, pretty much, Azachobe is a bandit king. He ended up getting caught, and he's been in prison for about a month now. And as soon as that happened, Toma went and became a member of the Yamada Asaemon clan, just so he could end up saving his brother Azachobe. So we see Chobe here, and he's just like, nice, so how are we going to get out? I mean, it only took you long enough, right? And he's like, I've endured torture at these people's hands for a while, and him and Toma sort of had a little bit of banter, and eventually he's like, so how are we getting out? And Toma's like, well, here's the thing, there's a fun little way we've got here where we may be able to get a pardon and have them stop pursuing us. As we see, like, for instance, with Sagiri went after Gabimaru to find him, and they became sort of a duo here. Chobe is a duo with Toma, which I think is a really cool sort of twist here, and knowing that they're both brothers, it's just a sort of really interesting and small thing that's just really cool. So we sort of see that Chobe is just like, yeah, I'm in, I like this idea, right? Let's go and get him. So we cut to Toma and Chobe here on the island as they're sort of going around here, and we see Toma sort of give some narration about Azachobe, and it's like, my brother's best ability is being able to appraise the situation and understand it, right? As we see they finally run into some of the monsters and creatures, and they're sort of going around them, right? And they're still starting to move around, and Chobe eventually is like, here's the thing, I can kill him then, as he sort of starts to murder some. And Toma sort of continues, my brother's strength is how quickly he understands situations. And we sort of get a little bit of backstory into two of them, that their family was under the leadership of a lord, and the lord ended up committing an outrage and at Edo Castle, and the entire clan was disbanded. Eventually their mother died whenever they were living in poverty, and eventually their father was executed for trying to avenge the said lord. And we see this entire time, Toma is sort of being a massive crybaby about all of this, while Chobe is sort of just here, like, not really giving a crap, it doesn't seem like. And eventually they're sitting on tatami mats outside with a little jar in front of them, obviously trying to beg for money here. And a group of bandits ends up coming to the pair of them, right? And Azachobe sort of understood the situation so fast, he ended up controlling it, and eventually he became the bandit king leader. And we cut to when Chobe's obviously done this, and Toma's with him, and they're about to get caught, right? There's people outside trying to catch him, and Chobe's like, Toma, you need to run. And he's like, I won't going to. He's like, here's the thing, I'm gonna get caught, you come rescue me later. I believe in you, right? As we get some more narration, we don't live in a world where the strong prey on the weak. It's survival of the fittest that really matters. As we see that, cutting back to the future here on the island of Shinseikyo itself, we see Chobe's here. He's got a little hand axe, and he's going through and sort of trying to kill these things. He's like, come on, Toma, we're going to slip through and sort of win this, right? As he sort of starts running to go harm him, and Toma sort of has some flashbacks about how he's always been following his brother, as they're all sort of coming together here, and Toma has really long hair. And as they're running past all these creatures, Chobe doing the damage he can, trying to slice them up and all that good stuff, what ends up happening is one of the creatures grabs Toma's hair, right? And Toma's like, oh no, come on, Chobei, please help me out. And all of a sudden, Chobei sort of just throws his hammer to the ground, or not his hammer, his little hand axe, and just starts running on his own, as it looks like he's going to leave Toma to die. But Toma's just like, you know what, screw this. You won't get past me. And he's like, I'm a Yamada Simon sword tester too. My brother's strong because he doesn't fear like I do. As he sort of grabs his sword and goes around, cuts the creature's arms off and everything. As Chobei comes back by his side, and he grabbed one of these really big hand axes, like human-sized axes that, what's it called? That one of these monsters was using. He's just like, what better to cut them down to size and using one of their own weapons, right? And he's like, hey, thanks, Toma, you gave me time to pick up a weapon, right? It's just a really cool thing that these two have such, like, a brotherly strength and bond to them. It's just a really awesome, I have to say, right? And eventually, they just start trying to fight him some more, and eventually one of these monsters comes up, and they're just like, murder is a sin. As we see that these monsters start to talk, right? One of them says, like, even insects are alive, and pretty much all of these monsters sort of surround him in a circle. And fun fact, we see another one of the fish creatures, the praying fish that Gabimaru and Sagiri fought earlier in the episode. So it seems like there's more than just one of these creatures, right? They're sort of breedable in a way. So Chobei's here, and they're just like, well, if these things can talk, we can kill them, right? As Toma sort of has the realization of, are these real deities or something? I mean, are we not in heaven but in hell instead? And he's just like, are we where sinners receive their divine punishment? As we sort of see that they're just keeping yelling at him, and Chobei, it's a little interesting moment where Chobei is standing here and there's like a film screen that's going on behind him, as it's like, they shall be executed, right? And seeing a bunch of these things about how criminals are bad and everything, and Chobei's just like, I'm sick and tired about hearing about crimes and sins, as he's like, I don't give a shit, as he just grabs his axe here and just starts killing them, and he's just like, you guys aren't the ones who decide what's right and wrong, like, he's just like, you're slaves to righteousness, as he just starts to kill him and kill him more, and he's just like, I'm not letting anyone else tell me what I can and can't do, as sort of just like, I am my own lord, and I am my own god, as he's sort of standing here, and Toma's just like, my brother's strength is change, and he's just like, and because he changes, it always comes first, and he has this undying sense of self about him, as they cut back again to the past, where Chobei is, come rounding a corner, and Toma's on the ground, sort of just crying, and he's just like, man, I don't want to have to do this, right, and he's just like, we went from being samurai's children, honored folks, now being crimes and bandits. He's like, I want to go back to the mansion. I don't want to have to deal with this. And Chobei's just here. He's just like, man. Or no, Toma's like, I don't know what's right anymore. She's sort of like, this is bad, not good. And Chobei sort of grabs him and is like, don't cry, Toma. If you show any weakness, you'll die. And he continues on like, if you don't know what's right, then trust me. I'm your older brother, and an older brother always shows his younger brother the way. As he's like, I am always right, you can trust in me. And we cut back to the present where Toma is looking at his brother who just killed all these creatures. And he's sort of just like, yeah, I deserve to follow him. This is my right call in life. As Chobei sort of continues, and he's just like, if these monsters exist, then the elixir must be real as well. And he's just like, well then, I've made up my mind. We'll kill every last monster on this island, every last criminal, and we'll get the elixir for ourselves, and we will drink it ourselves. And he's just like, we'll be so immortal, we'll show death how to live. As Toma's just like, man, I like that idea. And they sort of talk together, and they're just like, this island is a very dangerous place, and anyone else that we meet is going to be another survivor and another really strong person. As we cut around to the other duo that we really haven't got any focus on, as I know, they'll get more info on them next episode. We cut by Fuchi and Gin Tetsutsai, and then the group of 5 between Genji, Senta, Yuzuriha, Gabimaru, and Sagiri, who is still passed out, as the episode pretty much ends as Toma's just like, the weak on this island will be wiped out, as we see Sagiri is obviously very weak right now, obviously alluding towards that. And that is the end of the episode. Of course, after the end of the episode, we have the ending, which of course is Kamahate by Uru, and that's the episode. I think this was an alright episode, not the best we've had, but still a decent one. I really like all the stuff we had with Fuchi, Ginu Tetsutai, and then the Chobe brothers. Out of this series, since I've read this before, I do really like most of the characters in this, and I definitely think the Chobe brothers are just a sort of great chaotic duo that exists throughout the entire series. Sort of finally getting to see them animated and what they're up to is really cool, and I personally think that's the best part of the episode. The whole stuff with Gabimaru, Sagiri, Mizuriha, Senta, and Genji was fine in their whole fight, but I really think the highlight of this episode is the Chobe brothers, and I mean, if you didn't get that from just watching this, I don't understand how you didn't. Just the whole thing of Ozza just being like, I will be a god, and just like, we will drink that elixir for ourselves, and his brother Toma, who obviously trusts him and loves him, and just like, yeah, let's do that. And that's really all I have to say about this episode of Hell's Paradise. Really good, and hey, next time I'll be back with episode 5 of Hell's Paradise. So just again to go over all the bases, this was episode 4. It was actually titled Hell and Paradise, and it included the rest of chapter 6, that beginning portion of it, and then 7 through 9, so about 3.5 chapters. But yeah, with that, I don't have much else to say, and yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff if you enjoy the videos on the channel, and yeah, I'll be Glowplasma231 out.